Do you have projects that you know you are never going to finish because they are so much fun? That's the case with my garden party embroidery quilt.
I'm Michelle. This is my romantic tangle, and let me tell you about this ridiculous quilt that I started back in 2014 and worked on for 3 years or so before I abandoned it. And I just sat down to record this video, and I know why I abandoned it. I'll tell you at the end. I was looking through library books, and in the book, The Gentle Art of Stitching, I found the Garden Party quilt. It is amazing. I will post a link in the description box below to the author's quilt that she made. What she did is she saved the stitches and she cut them all into uniform squares and sewed them together into a quilt. And it is gorgeous. And at the time that I found this idea, I was not able to go out and buy or look for a lot of somebody else's stitching. It was while my husband was still recovering from his head-on collision with a drunk driver. I couldn't go look for stitching to buy, but what I could do was stitch it myself. So I talked to my mom about the project. It turned out that in her toll painting stash from the 70s, she had all of great grandma's embroidery patterns, or a lot of them. And I got some at estate sales, and I got some at thrift stores, and I bought a ridiculous number at Walmart because they still sell these Aunt Martha's patterns. They're 97 cents at Walmart. I checked yesterday. These things are everywhere. And I will post a link to the haul that I found a couple of years ago, long after I had abandoned this project, because if I come across these dirt cheap, I still pick them up. I'm not done stitching yet. I had vintage sheets in my stash. I had old flour sack towels. I basically went out of my way to find different shades and textures of white fabric to stitch on because I wanted it to look like I had gone and picked up vintage embroidery. And then I started stitching. And I stitched. And I stitched. I went to the craft store and I bought one of those cheap off-brand bags of multicolored floss because I knew I had my DMC up in the sewing room, and a little voice in the back of my head told me, you bought all these colors for specific projects and you used the cheap stuff for this. In hindsight, I'm glad I did, and I'm not having to rebuy all that DMC now. And one of the things I knew as I was stitching these, this one's from my mom's, this is from the toll painting stash. I love this little old lady. And I stitched in the recliner. While the kids were doing the schoolwork, I stitched at classes I took the kids to. I have got embroidery projects in probably every knitting bag I had at the time. They're not all here in this box. I'm missing a bunch. I'm missing some big stuff. But I fell in love with these, and I still love them, and my stitching is terrible. I think part of that maybe I was so stressed the year that I did most of these. And I would tell myself little stories about what was going on in the images. And they're different sizes because when I put mine together, it's going to be a crazy quilt. And I know that it's not going to go well. It's going to be a challenge. This is probably my transfer pen ran on this one or something. I don't know what happened there, but I'm okay with it. I really, truly am okay with it. I don't know what's going on with this lady. Is something outside her window scared her while she was ironing or something? I really don't know. I love these day of the week towels. And I love the crazy vintage stuff with all the animals doing people things and the his and hers and the pots and pans and fruit with faces. I love these. You see, okay, this one's an old flour sack towel, or was an old flour sack towel before I cut it up and stitched it. I don't know why. Some of these little chicks with their to-do list are one of my favorite things. And I didn't think that I liked the cross-stitched on the embroidery until I did these Scotty dogs, and I love them. I can tell you the day I went to the thrift store with my grandma and found this pattern for these Scotty dogs. So there are so many memories tied up in stitching all of this. And I love the his and hers. I do not have any his and hers towels or pillowcases or anything in my house because, no, we're not going to use the his and hers towels. But if I can stitch them and put them in my quilt, oh, I am so totally doing that. And I was stitching little things on purpose because I knew I would do them for filler between the big things. And I would, oh, that's another thing. I would take these to speech therapy while my son was practicing his sounds. So I would put a bunch of images on one piece of cloth and tuck them in my purse and just stitch when I had a chance to stitch. Love the Chef and the Lobster. And the fiddler here, my husband and I watched the second half of the movie The Yearling, which I had never seen. And then I read a book called Jacob's Ladder, which was by the same author as the book The Yearling. And about that time, I found the pattern for this guy and stitched it. And it just, things tied together. I love the snail. I don't know why I love the snail. I spent way too much time trying to figure out how to get bubbles embroidered, and I finally settled with white on white, which you can't see here, but someday in the distant future when I'm snuggled up under that quilt, I'm going to be able to see the white on white. Here's another his and hers. Here's another where the transfer pen, I think, bled a bit. We were watching our way through Grizzly Adams when I stitched the mule. So he is, I can't remember. At the time I knew the name of the mule. It's number 7, number 8, number something. I stitched this one while my boys were taking a class on how to speed solve Rubik's Cubes. And here's one I transferred and never stitched. I could go back and do that. Little Girl in the Rain. And here's the, like I said, I love the anthropomorphic kitchenware. It just makes my heart sing. The first time I transferred these cookies, I had an iron mark on my fabric. Hindsight, I almost wish that I had left it and stitched that one. Okay, now this, I'm going to have to look and make sure these are not the same Scotty dogs. Nope. I got Scotty dogs with a washcloth and Scotty dogs with a picnic basket because like I said, I really liked stitching these dogs. Guy in a wash tub. More bubbles. Ballerina. What is he? A gremlin or a goblin or something with carrots. I went up to a crafting thrift store in Portland called Stitch and Kitten that I don't think is there anymore, or Knit and Kitten, and found a bunch of patterns and paid a little bit more than I would have liked, but look at him. I needed him. She's another one of my Walmart patterns. Those bicycle spokes. I remember struggling with the bicycle spokes. And this one, I bought the pattern at Value Village, same trip as the Scotty dogs. All of the ink had faded off the transfer sheet, so there was no ironing it on. But a lot of them, the ink, if they're 50, 60 years old, the ink does not always work. I copied that faded transfer sheet on the darkest possible setting of my printer and then traced it so that I could get an image that was clear enough to clean up and trace onto my fabric because I wanted this thing so ridiculously bad. And I love it. I just, I thought at one point that I was going to start piecing these together. And then I realized how many other patterns that I still have that I have not stitched yet that I would love to put in here. And now I'm looking at this thinking of, there's some really big ones that are not in the stack because they are obviously in bags somewhere in my sewing room. Because like I said, when I worked on this project, I was so completely scattered. This was just a distraction, and it was the perfect distraction. In hindsight, I should have pulled these out in 2020 and seen if I could fall back into that distraction, because I could have, God, I would have had a king-size quilt by the time I was done with the crazy of 2020. So why did I give up on this? Why did I put it to the side when I loved it so much? I bought a cross-stitch kit at St. Vincent's of a little cat peeking out of a pumpkin because I thought I might, after all this embroidery, be able to try count a cross-stitch again for the first time in 15 years. And I stitched the pumpkin, and I pulled out my stash, and I dove headfirst into floss tube. And I kind of completely forgot about all this embroidery that I had done. So I'm going to keep these here in their box. They are safe and sound, and I'm going to maybe stitch some more blocks or maybe keep working on the projects that I'm currently obsessing about. Either way, it is fine. These will be put together into a quilt. It may be sooner or it may be later, and you know I keep picking up more of these old vintage cross-stitch patterns and finding more things I want to add to my quilt. And like I said, I may never ever finish this, and I am totally okay with it because I'm having fun.
I didn't realize how many of the blocks I have stitched are not there in the box with everything else. That gal getting ready for her evening out is one of my absolute favorites. And I had totally forgotten that I stitched some of these, which with the little ones, it's understandable, but that Raggedy Ann doll with the stroller, she took time. So I need to figure out where these are. I think they will come to light as I clean out my sewing room. Those clothespins do have a scorch mark on them. And yes, I didn't do it on purpose, but I made the deliberate decision to leave it there because it's going to add character to the finished quilt by the time I get it all put together.
Do you have a never-ending project? Let me know in the comments below. I am Michelle. This is my romantic tangle. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with you soon.